92 MR2. Customer complains about fluctuating idle, stalling a couple of times. It only acted up twice for the customer. I drove the car initially, didn't really feel anything, had good performance, pick up and go, idle was okay. Got it into the shop, and that's when I did some data logging. The OBD1 port is here. My Solus Ultra was able to do some data logging, and I'm not sure if I put the video in the front of this video or at the end of this video, but anyways, while watching RPM and engine coolant, temperature, O2 sensor, I saw the temperature dropping from 90 degrees down to 10 degrees, at which point the engine started to run a little bit rough, and then all of a sudden it caught itself going back up to 92 degrees. When unplugging the sensor, I was expecting the temperature to go minus like it does on Volkswagens, but in this case it just drops down to 80, so it's a substituted value, but circuit integrity is pretty much confirmed anyways, because once it's plugged back in, it does spit out the correct value that the temperature spits out. Obviously it's a wrong value, be it 10 degrees instead of 90 some odd at operating temperature. So anyways, I'm just going to change this sensor and we'll go from there, but I forgot my needle nose pliers. I should also mention that even though the temperature was fluctuating, or the sensor was spitting out a value that was fluctuating from 90 to 10 degrees, it did not set a fault code, because according to the computer, or at least this computer, this generation of that vintage, it is not flagged as being an erroneous signal. Once I disconnected it and the computer substituted a value, that's when a fault code was stored. So it did not have a fault code with just the sensor acting up, but once the sensor is disconnected, that also again confirms circuit integrity, because of the fact that once it's disconnected, it recognizes the open circuit. Now, what size is this? It's a 19 millimeter, so all you need is a 19 millimeter deep socket. This is the 2.2 liter engine. Actually, I should relieve the pressure first in the cooling system, just in case there's pressure. Okay. Put the cap back on, so that way there's less gravitational pull on the coolant, because air obviously has to get in and coolant comes out, so it has a harder time going. Air has a harder time going back in if you leave the cap on. As you can see, the fluid level is pretty much just stationary. New sensor with new gasket. Hand started. Should be nice and easy to turn all the way until it's bottomed out. If it doesn't turn that easily, start it again, because obviously I think their threads would be binding at that point. And then just tighten it tight, not too tight, just tight enough. Plug the sensor back in. In order to clear fault codes, there's an EFI fuse, electronic fuel injection. And with the key off, that fuse is hot, so just pull it out, leave it out for 30 seconds, and that'll clear any fault codes that were in the computer. Okay, sensor is tight. I'm going to hook up my Solus and do some more data logging. I won't spend much more time on it, because obviously it acted up, and no need racking up labor charges with a further test drive for too long of a test drive afterwards. Thanks for watching. Okay, here's some data captures of the MR2 that I did, or data logging. The first data log I did here had RPM, fuel injector, millisecond pulse width, map sensor, and coolant temperature. And so you can see the RPMs changing, and then the injector, obviously as I'm accelerating, the pulse width increases up to 14 milliseconds, and then once the RPMs or the load stabilizes, it drops down to the norm, just under 5 milliseconds. And then the map sensor, you can see, is fluctuating according to throttle and slash load, or basically a manifold vacuum, because obviously a map sensor works off of manifold vacuum. And you can see here coolant temperature starting off at just under 92. So I started data logging after the engine was warm, which was actually beneficial because the vehicle didn't act up until it reached a certain temperature. And here you can see it dropped down from 90, let's say it was 90 or 91, down to 10 degrees, and then it stayed there for a couple of seconds, and then it went back up to 90, and it stayed perfectly fine there for a while, and then it dropped out again. In the next slide here, this is the further continuation of a data log, just RPM, coolant temperature, and then coolant sensor voltage. Again, RPM, I'm just playing with it just to try to get things to act up. So we got idle speed up to 3,000 some odd RPM, and then over here the temperature drops down to just around 10 again, and it stays there for this time around for quite a while. And you can see the RPMs, I'm just playing with the RPMs, trying to get this thing to change, or trying to change the temperature sensor value again. And when the coolant temperature goes low, you can see the voltage going up high. Again, it's a thermistor, so depending on the resistance of the thermistor, voltage changes. And then towards the end here, it goes back up to 90, voltage comes down. So definitely something going on with that temperature sensor. And the last data logging that I did, same thing, RPM, coolant Celsius or coolant temperature, and then O2 sensor, but this is after replacing the sensor. And so you can see the temperature started at about 50 degrees, and then you can see the gradual rise in the sensor value as the engine heats up. And obviously various RPMs here because I was driving the vehicle, stop and go traffic, so the RPMs was all over the place. O2 didn't come online until a few minutes into the test drive. It's a single wire O2, so it takes a while to warm up, and even once it does, all it is a rich lean switch. I'm not even sure if it is real-time switching of the O2 sensor. Some of you Toyota techs might know better, but you can see that it basically signifies closed loop operation, switching from lean to rich. And then down here, for whatever reason, it was staying for lean for a while, and then other times you can see it's staying rich for a few seconds or for an extended period of time. So I'm not too concerned about it, as long as it is switching lean rich once the vehicle gets warm. So that was it. Temperature sensor was the fault with this vehicle, and fairly straightforward. Luckily I caught it on the with the Solus Ultra in terms of watching data blocks or data PIDs. Otherwise you'd just be guessing, you know, if you get a vehicle with a symptom of you know, stalling or irregular idle, if you don't have a scan tool, or at minimum even get blink codes. Blink codes wouldn't even have helped me here because remember I said there were no codes stored, because the computer didn't think that there was anything wrong, even though the temperature dropped from 90 down to 10 degrees. So having a scan tool where you can view live data definitely helps, especially on a vehicle that has data stream capability. Obviously with the older fuel injection stuff from back in the 80s, you can't watch or view live data in some of these. Then it just comes down to testing components one by one and hopefully finding one that is the culprit. But in a case like this where it doesn't act up all the time and it's only cuts out for a short period of time, things can be difficult to spot. But when you have a scanner that you can view and graph, you can catch those glitches. Anyways, that's it. Car runs fine again. Thanks for watching.